Okay, we are recording now and we have a live transcript with closed captioning. We'll just give it another minute for other folks to join. And I'm just making a note of who's here. Sean, he's not in yet. Dunwoody said he will be able to hop in and out of this meeting. He has another meeting at the same time.
Kevin, can you hear me now? I'm on a different, I'm on my iPhone.
You sound wonderful. Oh, that's too bad we didn't record in time to hear your previous voice because that was something else. Has anyone else ever experienced that on Zoom before?
Yeah, actually, I had a colleague who had a similar issue one time. And it actually didn't get fixed. She just couldn't get on. She went on her phone, I think, too.
Huh.
One of those freaky things, I guess.
I just assumed that it was like a low internet speed connection on my end or something.
I don't know what it is.
Yes, Rena, you would have enjoyed hearing Annette sound like that. It was strange. Okay, why don't we get started? And what I will do is share my screen. I just have an agenda outlined here. 1 second. An agenda that will sort of guide our conversation today. So I will let Annette give us an overview. And actually, before we do that, Annette, if you don't mind, I want to introduce some new folks that are joining us today. That sound good? So we have a new member of our city planning team, Heather, who can introduce herself. Some of you have met her already, but not everyone. So go ahead, Heather.
Hi, Heather Anderson, the new person on the City Planning Office team. I just moved to Rochester recently from Los Angeles, where I worked for 8 years as an urban planner, first for the city and then for the county. And I'm very happy to be here.
Great, thanks, Heather. So she's going to be helping me out on the planning and facilitation side of things for this group. So we're really glad to have her with us, and she does have some experience in Los Angeles with working with public art and working with artists as well. So that's a nice bonus for when we found her.
Welcome.
And then Kara and Lily, do you want to introduce yourselves from special events?
Hello, everybody. I'm Kara Osipovich, the City Special Events Manager. I know I've worked with many of you in the past on lots of different projects in the past almost 15 years. So I'm glad to be here and happy to be on the team.
And
Hi, good morning. I'm Lily. I know most of you here. I just recently joined the city's special events office. If everybody had worked with Gloria Matos in the past, she retired and I took that position. So I am the special events coordinator, bilingual spot, and pleasure to see everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Lily. And we're glad to have those two join us as well. As you all know, we have a handful of city staff from different departments that are relevant to these different arts initiatives. And we probably should have done this sooner, but we're glad to have special events be part of this now as well. So we make sure that everything is properly coordinated across all the different departments that are involved. So with that, Annette, if you want to kind of just give a quick overview of what we'll try and cover today, and then I'll stop the screen share and we can just see each other as we walk through each of these items.
Thank you, Kevin, and welcome all of these wonderful new internal community partners. As many of you have worked already in the city and have really done tremendous work. So thank you. We're going to cover 3 items today, moving forward with the development of the Creative Community Empowerment Plan. We want to look and discuss qualifications for a consultant that specializes in city arts planning. So it is a very specific area of expertise that we're looking. Our second discussion item will be a competitive grant program for the public arts. How are we going to develop that? And then, of course, looking at the actual physical art and the ways for us to fund non-capital art. So there's been clarification, which Kevin will get into, about what we can fund and cannot fund right now. And we are going to be also looking at an amendment to the ordinance as well, which Kevin will cover. So the goal of our meeting today is really to move forward at least the first 2 action items in a consensus of the entire team's decision. Kevin or Sean, did either one of you want to cover what we've done in the last 6 weeks with our meetings?
You can go ahead and keep covering that. And sorry, I'm jumping in between 2 Zooms. I'm double booked here, so you keep
Awesome.
going.
Thank you. So the first meeting that we had, we met with the city council and that was very informative. We have now partners on city council that have really taken on the cause for arts engagement in the city. And really their process was asking us if the ordinance as it existed is viable, or do we need to amend it or add to it? So Kevin will speak more of those details that we looked at and what alternatives and avenues we have. The second meeting was with Mayor-elect Malik Evans, and he was an enthusiastic, yes, what needs to be done, what have you done, and how do we move this forward? So he absolutely is very interested in the work that we have done and wants to continue to empower this advisory council to continue to move forward arts funding. And he's also committed and dedicated to providing staff within the city to manage this. And that is critical since all of us are volunteers and we all have full-time, multiple other jobs and commitments. And then the last meeting was with Executive Bello. And that was quite informative. He, as we know, has increased arts funding in the county level to 150, I think it is. So it's 3 times the amount that it's been in the past. But he is really looking at this or this committee to assist the city. And then once the city has created our action plan, he wants to replicate that at the county level. There will be an executive arts commission at the county level, but Executive Bello is really waiting to see how we implement what we set forth in the city and how the county can replicate that. Thomas and Sean, did I miss any of the pieces that we discussed in those meetings?
No, that sounds about right. I think that's about where we are. Yeah, you did a great job, Annette. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was
Welcome.
great, Annette. I think I'll just add on there that the city council is also ready to put together some kind of, I don't know, ordinance might not be the right word, I don't know, that kind of solidifies, you might say, this group. I just feel that that's very important that this group become kind of officially part of the city rather than a kind of sideline in the mayor's office. So they are ready to move forward with that as soon as the new administration, gets going and is in place and all of that. So I just wanted to put that little piece in. But yeah, Annette, you covered it perfectly. One other thing I'll say though is the county and the city are also wanting to work in tandem in some ways with the arts sector. So it may or may not be these particular groups that we're creating. We don't really know what it's gonna be, but both the city, the mayor and the county executive want the city and the county to work kind of in tandem in some ways when it comes to the arts and culture. So I just wanted to say that part.
Can I just jump in really quick? And I know you probably covered this, Annette, and I apologize. But I know that one of the things that that Bello and both Malik realizes that the way to get this forward is realizing the economic impact of the arts and the power of creative capital. We'll expand it to that because that incorporates, so many other factors, culinary arts to technology, all those sort of things. So the way that they can see moving this forward and having buy-in from other individuals to help support this is actually that creative capital, the economic impact of creative folks. So I just wanted to add that point in there.
Yes, thanks, Sean, and kudos to all three of you for just pressing and getting those meetings set up with council, with mayor-elect, with the county executive. I think it's gonna really pay off in the long run. And that was just the first of many meetings because I think you all are working hard to establish solid relationships. You already have solid relationships with some of those folks, but others are sort of new. So building on those relationships will really help this effort moving forward. So thanks for that summary. Anybody have any questions about those meetings? No? Okay. I'll stop sharing here, but I can turn it over to Heather to talk about what we're looking at doing to amend the arts ordinance.
Hi, everyone. So to refresh everyone's memory on this, the percent for arts policy specifies that 1% is taken from the capital improvement program, which essentially tags that funding as needing to be spent on capital projects. We heard loud and clear from you all that the percent for arts or arts equity fund needs to be fund non-capital as well as capital art. So we've been working with city staff to really resolve how to enable that money to also be spent on non-capital art. And we're happy to say that we have reached a resolution. Our budget folks have confirmed that with an amendment to the ordinance, we can require that starting in fiscal year 22-23, some portion of Arts Equity Fund can go into an operating budget line to enable it to be spent on non-capital art, with the remainder then staying in a capital budget line to be spent on capital art. We are starting to work on that amendment and are aiming to get it to City Council in February, March at the latest, to ensure that there's ample time for budget folks to act on this again in fiscal year 22-23. We plan on not specifying how much should go into an operating line for non-capital art in the ordinance. Instead, the amendment, we're planning to have the amendment say that this committee and later the Arts Commission will annually decide how much of the funds for that year will go into capital versus non-capital. And we kind of see that as a great way to give this committee and then the commission kind of the flexibility and the creativity to develop specific programs every year based on what you see as needs. The important note here is that operating expenses or operating funds do not roll over into the next fiscal year. So if we don't spend it by the end of that fiscal year, it's gone. As a strategy to kind of address that tight timeline, we're planning on including in the amendment establishing that the calculation for the upcoming fiscal year be based on the previous fiscal year calculation. That way, everyone knows ahead of time how much money there is and how much money can go to non-capital, and you can start deciding on that as early as possible. So this is a lot of information, but just to kind of bring it all together, what this means is that if the amendment is approved, the Arts Equity Fund for fiscal year 22-23 will be $236,000 because it'll be based on the previous fiscal year. So you all now know how much there is for fiscal year 22-23, and you can start deciding how much of that you want to go towards non-capital versus capital art. Again, with the caveat that whatever you put towards non-capital in the operating funds would need to be spent by July 1st, 2023. So it's a really good idea to maybe have a discussion on whether that means you kind of limit how much you're spending so that you ensure that you get it out in time, or just have that process in place to really make the decision. Are there any questions on that? That's a lot of information, I know, but it's exciting information, right?
I have a quick question. It is exciting information. Right at the beginning, you said that a portion of the funds would be non-capital and they will go towards operating budget. Is that the operating budget in the city, or is that they are,
so
they're specialized just to go towards organizations' operating budgets?
I think the budget folks can kind of give more details if needed, but really it's just that the reason the funds can only be used for capital right now is because those funds are tagged as capital. And with the amendment to the policy, we can tag those funds as operating, which you want to put towards non-capital so that they can be used towards non-capital art. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And I have a follow-up question based on that. Is there a way to also tag these as arts funding? I know that that's something that was in the 2034 plan that the city planned on doing, and I don't know where the progress is on actually tagging all art spending as art spending for the city.
Yeah, so let me sort of clarify a little bit on the previous question too, if I understand where you're coming from, Amanda, that when we say operating funds, that's purely an internal city term for the type of funds that we use here. And capital is also an internal term that means physical art, so sculptures, murals, etc. But when we say that some of it can be for operating, it's talking about city operating funds for experience-based public art. This money cannot be used for the operating funds of organizations. So we won't be able to use this money to give, say, to a dance troupe or something like that to help them just sort of stay afloat per se. But we could, in theory, give money to a dance troupe to commission them to put together a piece that would be publicly consumed. So whether it's capital or operating, this money has to be for art that is public art that is consumed by the public, and not for just sort of helping out arts organizations. That there is definitely a need for that, we've recognized that from day one. But that support for just general support for arts organizations or artists would have to come from something outside of this Arts Equity Fund. Does that help?
That does help. Thank you very much.
Sure. And do you feel like they answered the second question, or was that
So
more
the
about-
second question, I'm really curious if it's happening, and if not, when it's going to happen, if the budget plan is tagging arts spending in general in all the different categories across the budget yet, as relative to what was proposed in the 2034 plan.
Yeah, so we are making some progress on that, starting with looking at the past, and Heather can give an update on that in a minute as well, tracking past spending. I know you all have been asking for that. But as we do that, I think there's going to be ways that we can better track things moving forward, not to a penny, because some city expenditures are kind of fuzzy on whether you would consider them to be for the arts or not. There's and Kara's group does this a lot. They spend money on all different sort of logistical support for events that make the arts happen, but it's not spending money on the arts per se.
Yeah, I'm not really interested in the portion of the budget that's going to police overtime for festivals. I want to know how much is actually getting into the hands of artists.
Yeah, I think we can definitely improve on that moving forward now that we're having a better understanding of the past.
And again, I think the reason we want to get this right on the staff side is because, just a reminder for everybody, the original arts ordinance asks for a report to council every year on this. So we're going to need to do this no matter what going forward. So it's important for us to make sure we are capturing everything. And just speaking for the library, it's tricky because a lot of our money is also matched with private dollars. So we're trying to make sure, that's money that still matters, but it's not necessarily city money. So just so on one example of a department, just explaining some of the challenges, just trying to kind of tease out how much of it is actually city dollars going to some of these contracts has been some of that kind of delay.
So I think
Can
before,
I ask a question about that budget years there?
yeah, definitely.
So just to repeat, I think you said 236 is going to move over. Well, 236 will be the target number to spend in 22-23, correct?
Yeah, so this is kind of a, in order to kind of, because as I mentioned, the non-capital art funds will have to be spent within the fiscal year, which is kind of a tight timeline, especially considering you might not know how much, based on what the current calculation is, how we currently calculate it, which is within the same fiscal year, right? It would be hard to, you don't have a lot of time then to spend it. So we're adjusting so that we're actually calculating based on the previous year, so that you guys actually know for fiscal year 22-23, you will have $236,000 because that's actually the calculation from the previous year. So you have
Right.
that on top of the 236 that you currently have, that we currently have. Does that make sense?
So 236 is determined is actually coming from capital projects in what year? What year were those projects built?
Fiscal year 21-22. So we're
21.
changing. Yeah. So we're changing. This took Kevin and I a minute too to kind of grasp, but it's important for you guys to know because we're basically changing the way it was. We would calculate the amount of funds based in that fiscal year, but that doesn't give you a lot of time to plan for that money. Particularly, it becomes a concern when you have to spend non-capital art funds within the fiscal year. So we're changing it so that we're actually basing the calculation every future year. We will base the calculation on the previous fiscal year. And on the right, does that make sense? The 1% based on that capital from the fiscal year. So in this instance, we're going to have a double. Right, so we have 236,000 this year, and we will also have that for next year. But then from then on out, it'll be a different number every year. It's just that we're calculating it based on the previous year.
Sure. So capital projects that are built during 22-23, which fiscal year for the city, I'm assuming, right? And that's January 1 through December 31?
July 1st through June 30th.
Oh.
Yeah.
June 30 end fiscal year. So then, that number's, going forward, this June 30, this June 30, that will be the beginning of a new year, or July 1 would be the beginning of a new year, right? So
yes.
Then the projects that are being constructed, or how does that number make its way to us? I understand it's not the money to be spent that year, but how does that calculation come from the physical 1% concept? Which projects are being built beginning July 1 through 6/30? How's that process like being made public and or determined? Is it actual like shovel breaking ground during that year, or like, just curious, like, because the past has been many years sort of accumulating to this 2036, right? But going forward, how's that number actually coming into reality to then determine the future year budget to be spent?
Yeah, Christina from our budget office, maybe you want to chime in on that, how that's sort of calculated?
Sure. So that number is actually based on the capital projects that are funded during the fiscal year. So not necessarily capital projects that are actually constructed, because a lot of capital projects take multiple years to build out. So the city will develop a capital improvement plan that is then provided to city council in April of a certain year, and then will be voted on as part of the city's budget process in June and become the capital budget as of July 1. So the capital improvement program is an internal city process. And then what we do is we look at the 1% ordinance and apply all of the eligibility factors to the overall capital program to get to that $236,000 number, or whatever the number is for that year.
And sorry, Christina, if I may, so the eligibility factor isn't really that difficult, and it's based off the original percent for arts ordinance, which was based off other cities. So just as a reminder, we get federal dollars, we get county dollars, we get state dollars. Only the contribution of either debt or cash from the city for projects are what is eligible for this, which is part of why some city projects have taken federal dollars directly for art in the past, because a lot of those projects, right, like we have a big, like the grants that are going to come in for Interloop. Only the city portion of that match is really what we are calculating, right? So just something for everybody to think about. You'll see the city has a $150 million CIP. A third to 40% of that is coming from non-city dollars. So just so everyone is aware, and it doesn't include things like every year we set aside capital for replacement of computers, right? Those type of maintenance, like equipment maintenance, those aren't eligible. And that is the same standard that is applied to other cities that were using percent for art at the time. Johanna's nodding because that was, we looked at other cities' percent for art ordinances. It's when there's bigger investments that are involved. So it's not, when you hear formula, it's not that we're trying to be tricky or trying to not be transparent. It's just those like Christina and budget team will look at each project and say, is it federal or state or local? If it's local, is it for a main project? That's how they're calculated.
Yeah, thank you. I just feel like those are going to be really important conversations to boil this down to really simple, like outline points so that the art community can be made clear on where these numbers are coming from, how they're coming from, what is actually being built into that 236 or what have you for future years. And I think that, the people on this call are the best people to help the city convey that out to the art community, and maybe help give advice on how those numbers can be, presented in some kind of a simple website or something like that. I don't know. I just feel like, budgets, municipal budgets, they just become pretty complex and convoluted to the average artist out there who's like, wondering like, hey, where's that 236,000 coming from when I heard there was 4 million dedicated to this and 17 million for that and 20 million, like I just want to help create like, goodwill and good understanding.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Blue. We want to make sure that we're communicating this in a way that's takes it from very complex, which it is, to digestible sort of bullet points and clarify those things. That's a great point. So.
Before we move on, I wanted to visit, there's a couple of questions in the chat. Blue, one was from you asking to send everyone the legislation or screen share it. We've just started working with this, so we don't have a draft, but we're happy to share it with folks once we have that drafted so you all can see it and discuss it with us. Then I think, Rena, Christina answered your question. Any of the funds that are for capital art, they do roll over from year to year. So there's less of a time crunch than there will be for the non-capital art. It's the non-capital art that doesn't roll over, which is again why the need for the staggering of the calculation, right? Because otherwise it would be, we're finding out how much we have for July, starting in July, from July to June, in April. This way we're finding out a year in advance. So you can really start planning and making decisions ahead of time.
Sorry, just to clarify one thing too, if it's not clear, that this isn't, what we're talking about today is not changing what's in front of us today, which is the current pot of money that was calculated and set aside of $236,000. That for this first year of this program, this initiative, it's exclusively for capital or physical art, public art. So the change we're proposing applies to next fiscal year, starting in July 1st. So this committee is still tasked with figuring out what to do with this sort of first pot of money. And some of that, as we've decided or talked about, is that some of that money is being set aside to do the arts master plan, and the rest would be for capital art. And then the change to include non-capital art would start next fiscal year.
Okay, so hopefully, yeah, feel free to follow up with questions with us if some other questions come up. Sometimes it's things that seem straightforward are more complicated than they seem. But Blue, did you have another question?
Yeah, one more quickie, sorry. So will this open up so there'll be two possible expenditures only, right? Two possible ways in which the percent for the arts can be spent, right? Physical commissions of public art and non-physical, say commissioning a new performance at the Avenue. Correct? It was just those two things. It can't go toward other, I don't know.
Within that, this is just a push from the original arts policy team. Within that first category of actual physical art, there was a discussion about making sure we have the ability to maintain, right, or repair existing art that was placed in the right way through this program. So I think there needs to be a recognition that part of this was to try and make sure that we had the ability. And again, let's remember, we have an art ordinance. We don't have an arts policy. So how we evaluate that public art is not really determined, or deaccession it if it gets to the point where we cannot maintain it. We don't have that documented yet, but the intent was to also be able to, from time to time, provide some preventative maintenance in conjunction with the artist or at the recommendation of the city to be able to make sure they remain safe.
So will this amendment that you're going to share with us show like the, couple possible expenditures that this money can go toward?
It'll basically say there will be, the group will decide on how much of each year that the Arts Equity Fund or the percent for the arts goes into operating line versus capital line. And the operating line just means it can be spent on non-capital art, and the capital line is capital art. And the group will decide that year to year. One other thing I wanted to bring up, because I feel like it hasn't come up, but I believe that non-capital art can also be arts education, right? So I feel like we haven't talked about arts education very much, but that's a thing in there too. Okay, so are there any other questions before we move on?
One last question. Is it required that the non-capital funds it's required that they be publicly available art, whatever it is? Is it required that it also be free to the public?
That's a good question, Amanda. I'm not sure. Johanna or Bree or others have a take on that?
Generally, we have required that because then that's the public benefit. I don't know. That's something we would have to kind of decide on a case by case basis. So
especially when you just said classes, I'm like, my brain just went, I don't want city funds going to a class that costs $1,200 a head or something like that's not necessarily publicly available.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the past, I will share that the recreational department has done RFPs. They hire artists, teaching artists. I have been one of them. And they're actually arts educational programs within the rec centers. So that's what I think of as education within the recreational centers, because then they are serving Brown and Black communities, they're serving city residences. I would love to replicate that process because it's already in place at the city level. And that might also help us with our RFP for non-capital public art. That criteria should be a standard throughout the city for any educational arts programmings that enrich the lives of Brown and Black kids where they live and in the communities that they are in.
Definitely agree. I would just love to see it marked, like codified in a way that this needs to actually be accessible, like not if it's, especially if it's for events, like again, like if it's a $300 ticket to go to the ballet, then it's not publicly accessible. So I would love to have it actually codified and not just on good faith that that's the way it's been done. That these funds are actually being used for programs that are publicly accessible. And in a city like Rochester, publicly accessible means free.
I can chime in here too for a second from a special event standpoint. Can you guys hear me? We have written into, and you guys can write this into the application as well, that events must be free or low cost. We have a caveat because we know some events do have I mean, we talk usually like $20 or under is low cost. And if you have a ticket, that you're making a portion of tickets available free as well. Because we understand that organizations do need, support. We're not usually funding an entire production or an entire event. This is just a small part. So organizations still do need to make money to cover their other costs. So you might want to consider writing it into the application that you use, the grant application, to give away these funds, that you will give favor to the ones that are free or low cost in that. And then you can for sure put a dollar sign on what you guys consider low cost. But, understanding that what you're granting out is not going to, cover the whole production or whatever it is, whatever the performance is.
I do, if my memory is correct, I do recall this coming up in the original discussion back in 2006, somewhere, I don't know, 2007, 2006. This actually, we did have this discussion because we were just creating the Association of Teaching Artists at that time. And there was a discussion about what part the city would play in arts education. There was no, and it was no decision on anything actually. But I do think this brings up the point of an arts policy that both the city and the county need to, and those are the administrations need to kind of focus in on, because that would impact how we actually have this discussion. We're kind of having this discussion without an actual policy on arts, which is a little cart before the horse thing. But anyway, I think what Amanda's bringing up is really important. And we do need to bring this back to the administration, actually, not just a discussion in our group, but it actually needs to be a larger discussion of the administration on what their policies and how they, just what their policies will be on arts, and in that sense, also arts education. So anyway, just a discussion for us to have with that, and maybe this group actually to have with the administration to kind of guide where the policy should go.
Heather, can I clarify? Can I clarify a point? Sorry, real quick.
Oh, yeah.
Or I'm sorry, go ahead. No.
Go ahead. I was gonna go to the next item. So if you have something to chime in, please feel free.
So in the item that's going to go to council, is the suggestion that this committee would be selecting, how is that process going to be, how is that money going to be awarded to various projects? Is there going to be this committee selecting from RFPs, or do we need to figure that out?
So for the percent for the arts money will be decided by the committee and then the commission. And actually that's one of our agenda topics for the day, is talking about that process, because that really, we have to drill down into that process.
Yeah, and I think, Sarah, I think there's maybe some wiggle room in how that plays out, where in one scenario, it's this committee, and in another scenario, this committee is really responsible for drafting the process. And then the process might include that there needs to be a more intentional process of selecting the folks that will make that decision. So almost like this is a committee that forms a different committee. I think that's a possibility, because the way this committee came together last year was sort of ad hoc, sort of just very conversational.
Yeah, I think that's something that I would definitely be interested in talking about more as we like move. I think this is awesome. And I'm excited about what you've been able to do as far as getting there to be some leniency and some visioning for how to change the art ordinance. I just think we should really think through what the selection process is going to be and, making sure there's divisions and clarity on roles and stuff like that.
Yeah, especially in light of the fact that we're proposing a change to the ordinance that's opening things up. That was not in place when this group was put together. So I think that's a good point that we need to consider that.
If I may chime in, I actually agree with Sarah on having, I'm not sure, I know that we have 2 committees and I'm not sure if one of those committees can be a part of that. But when we think the word accessible, making this accessible, what does that really mean to you? And also choosing the groups that are marginalized, like LGBTQ or those with disabilities or those with BIPOC, so that way we, or, Latinx community, just intentionally, when you're saying intentionally choosing this groups, hopefully we're also involving that with the minority groups. And I also would like to be a part of choosing what arts we want to put in, if that goes in one of the committees. Yeah, and keeping in mind, if we have in the budget, if we're going to present this as well, if it will be accessible to those who are deaf and blind or deaf and hard of hearing and whatnot, making sure that we have interpreters for those and the placements and all of that. So,
And along with that, I want to ensure language access is part of the piece as well. Spanish is the second largest language spoken here, and there still is a lag in getting that information out to the ASL community as well as the Spanish speaking community. So everything we do should have those accessibility points, Antonetta. So thank you.
Absolutely. It's I would prefer to use the term deaf and hard of hearing community compared to ASL community, because when you say ASL community, you're including those who are hearing folks. So just FYI, there's 2 different things with that term. But thank you in that.
Right, as someone mentioned, you can be very specific in the criteria as you develop it. And when you say publicly accessible, you can be talking in terms of financial accessibility and then use inclusive to speak on all the groups you're trying to reach.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. These are great considerations for us to be thinking about.
I'm just going to really quickly just say that for the Public Arts Investment Tracker, we've made a lot of progress on it. We're excited to at some point soon share it with you and to map out the investment that we're tracking. We're doing tracking up to the beginning of 2016. So we'll keep you posted on that. But we should really jump into the next item, right? Kevin, you want to?
Yeah, so that's kind of all of our updates of what's brought us here today. But the co-chairs want to just kind of check in with everyone about some sort of decisions moving forward around the master plan and the grants program and that sort of thing. So to any of the co-chairs want to kind of just talk that through. I think we've kind of covered what we're looking at, but you want to just sort of spell that out for everyone?
I'll start. So this notion of a master plan, we have been discussing it. We are not in consensus within this group, and I think it's a really important piece. We're not going to get 100% agreement, but I think that the vote is essential so that each of us has our voice heard on this. And we can definitely discuss it. The hope and the desire is to make a decision to be able to begin the process. So a few of us feel strongly that a master plan is needed and hiring of that consultant. And I'm still really I know Kevin has talked about the specifics of someone who is skilled at writing an arts master plan. So that's an important piece. We've also talked about some of us in this group, and I certainly know at least 2 people in this group that are capable of writing portions of that. And it's really up to us to decide how we're going to move forward. But a plan of action has to be written with the standard communication or the language of that plan. I am not capable of writing that plan, but I can certainly contribute to elements of that plan. So let's open it up. I want to actually ask Blue to chime in because Blue has a very strong vision of what that might or could look like. Blue, would you like to chime in and share your ideas and recommendations?
I'm not sure I have a strong idea of what it can look like. But I know I've been maybe a little grumpy and a little stubborn regarding what I saw as an assumption that a master plan was a fait accompli and needed to happen, and that these funds should be spent on it. So I think I have, in a number of other smaller meetings, called the question, has that been decided? And has it been decided how much of those limited funds, 236, can and should be spent on said master plan? And I think that going back to our last meeting, which was 4 or 5 months ago, I don't remember actually, maybe only 4 months ago. I think there were just a lot of discussions around how that would work, what it would look like, whether that such a document was necessary and or should be written internally versus hiring someone to do it. And so I think maybe what you're referring to is me just kind of, calling the question as to have we actually decided that that is a valid and or community accepted expense, or maybe even legally accepted expense for these limited $236,000. And to the degree which I've asserted my opinion on that in other conversations, I guess you are right. I have said what I think, and I'll restate that here. After so many years of wondering what's happening with the 1% for the arts, and those funds not, for a number of years, maybe all the way back to 2007, those funds not making their way out into approved projects, public art, etc. I've been a little bit anxious to move and dedicate those funds right now toward the organizations and artists in our community who are doing that good work that we're all so proud of, and that we typically start out our meetings celebrating and recognizing the richness and the diversity of this art community. So for me, like my personal tendency here would be, yeah, let's spend that money now toward those organizations and artists that we're all so proud of. We've gotten to be the arts community that we're all so proud of, and that many empower, celebrate, and acknowledge without said master plan. So I personally am not convinced that that is the missing piece in our government and arts community, like, various different relationships. I personally am not convinced that a master plan is going to solve those dynamics. Yeah, I see the money waiting, and I think that it's been a long time coming. So I think it should be spent more directly as opposed to a master plan. That's my summary back to some of your previous conversations, and my opinion inserted as well. So thanks, Annette.
Can I just throw in just a couple of clarifying terms, just so to help frame the conversation? And I appreciate those comments, Blue. Heather and I have been digging into this more, trying to understand examples from other communities. And then we've actually talked to a couple of consultants that have done this kind of work, so we understand it a little better, because we've done community plans ourselves, but we've never done arts plans per se. So we've been learning from talking to some other folks that have done this. And I think there's an important distinction here between what I'll call a public art master plan and a sort of general arts and cultural plan for the community. I personally think there's a need for both, but more importantly, I think we want to distinguish the two. A public art master plan is a fairly specific plan for identifying where there's a need for more public art. So identifying gaps in the community, whether they be geographic or socioeconomic or different genres, different media within the arts community. So sort of identifying where the opportunities are, where the gaps are, and having a plan for, as money comes in, and we do have money coming in, this is where we would prioritize putting public art example X, and this is where we would prioritize putting public art example Y. So I think it's pretty important to have that plan, so we're not just kind of like whimsically picking ideas out of a selection process. But then the arts and cultural plan, the broader one, is more about the sort of arts ecosystem, arts and creative ecosystem that goes beyond just public art. But as a city of the arts, as a region of the arts, what's going well, what's not going well, what are our goals as a community, and how can we improve the arts ecosystem in Rochester, is it from an economic development perspective, is it an equity perspective, access, all those different things. We can identify where we want to be as a community and then how to get there. So that's sort of the arts and cultural plan, if you will. That's sort of the broader ecosystem. And then the public art master plan is a different thing. What we could do hypothetically is do both of those things in a contract with a consultant. So I just want to clarify there's sort of two different pieces to that, if that helps.
How is this different than the arts plan that has been outlined in the 2034 plan?
Essentially, it would build on that. So there's, I don't know, 4, maybe 5 goals in the arts and culture section of Rochester 2034, and maybe 20-ish strategies. And then Annette Ramos actually helped us with that section and enhanced it to what it is now with a lot of suggestions. But I think there's a lot more room to have a more intentional, more focused engagement with the community, both artists and non-artists, about how we can improve the overall arts and creative ecosystem in Rochester. And so there would be probably more goals and strategies to sort of stick to those terms developed as part of a arts and cultural plan. So essentially be building on it.
I just want to say, I think there is a, initially I was with Blue, I was like, let's get this money out, let's make this happen, get it in artists' hands. But after, meeting with, Malik and Bello, I think the time is ripe. And for right now, we have the creative collision that we need to produce this plan that will help the city, which will in turn, affect the county, which will shape the whole region. So I think we have the perfect storm to actually put together what this plan is, what this comprehensive plan is for the city and for the county. So we know going forward, we know there are guidelines, rules, regions that we're going to adhere to make sure that we continue to be this strong arts region. So I've kind of shifted over to maybe this consultant team or whoever it is does help us shape this plan for the city that extends to the county, because we've got the people and players that are willing to work together now. And let's take that opportunity right now.
Maybe I can just clarify just quickly. I'm not opposed to developing said plan in any way, shape, or form. I'm just questioning whether, with $236,000 to spend coming, from 7 years of waiting, or all the way back to 2007, excuse me, is this really the right pot to pull 100,000 from? I guess that's my fundamental, question. I think more planning, more alignment between county, city, all of those long-term plans are excellent. And I just, wonder with so many other possible funders for $100,000, do we need to spend 40% of it, 40% of 236 on this consultant? That's basically where my question was coming from.
Has there been any consideration about the idea of like a third, a third, a third? What if the city was asked for a portion that could come from a different source, the county is asked for a source of funds, and the community foundation is asked for a source of funds? Because I know that they do have some level of unrestricted arts. If we make the delivery of showing, right, I think the problem has been that there hasn't been the ability to show that the city is moving forward on the core component, the original component being the percent for art. So if there is movement there, maybe the request is developed in a different way. I'm not saying that I cannot speak for the city and say that they would be able to give $30,000 from an undistributed source of funds that's non-percent for art, but that's a lot less of a heave, especially if the county is involved. And if there's a joint, if we're going to go with this idea of a regional study, it should be really regional. It should not just be a city focused study. It should be broader.
I very much like having stakeholders financially invested across the community in getting this plan put together. I think that's really important, that there be multiple stakeholders financially committed to. I like that, because that then helps, especially with the county and involving somebody like the community foundation. I think that also helps for accountability in the whole process as well.
But I think then that ask needs to be fleshed out in a true scope of work for what the consultant would be doing that shows benefit to those three stakeholders. Not that that's hard, it needs to be developed.
That was actually one of the things, one of the consultants we talked to stressed the importance of a regional arts plan and how this is like a national issue, the tension between cities and counties, and how that's one way to get county buy-in ideally is to show how they benefit from it, right? But a couple other things that we've heard that I think are just helpful for, as we kind of all together learn what this plan could be. A couple of things that we heard said was, one is it's about how the city and county are serving the residents, right, with art, like as well as we talked about the need for an arts policy. Like the plan could include kind of like an arts policy core. Another piece of that could be what we've heard termed in arts planning as a cultural equity policy within an arts policy, which I think could be really important. And then a couple plans, not many plans, but a couple plans we've seen have had actual implementation plans with a budget. So actually like cost it out, like a cost estimate for things, which I think is really effective, especially if we are engaging with partners, to be able to put a price tag on something so people understand, and really hopefully it enables not only the buy-in and the kind of the social structure to move things forward, but really the capital, right, infrastructure to move things forward. So the term we've heard was cultural budget, which was, yeah.
Yeah, I think in both our conversations with Malik and the county executive, they both mentioned this sort of getting some money together from both sides to help us move forward with this sort. They didn't use the word policy, but I'm using the word policy to get that going about the whole region. So I think, as Sean said, we're actually at a very important point here in history for us that may never happen again, because county and the city are not always on the same page. And so while they are on the same page, I really feel like the time is now to get these policies in place, and also it's about getting structure for the future. So it's, I agree with Blue that I do want to get the money out there, and actually I'm sort of listening to you differently today, Blue, because I hear what you're saying about maybe this money should not be coming from this $200 and something thousand to be put, $100,000. Yeah, actually, I do agree with you on that. And I think now that we've talked to both the mayor, the incoming mayor, and the county executive, and they're on board with finding funds, I think that now puts us in a different perspective. And my other thing about this is that I feel if we don't get some structure, the non-structured, non-policy, non-process is actually how we got to where we are with this sort of chaotic kind of system. in both the city and the county. And so I really want it for the future. I mean, yeah, for us now too, but once we're gone, I want to make sure that the people coming after us, who are behind us, that they will have a process in place that is equitable. And so that's my, I mean, really, that's my whole point of this, this whole thing, is that I want to make sure that the future is really better than what we're doing now, what we've done for us. I want to make sure it's being done correctly, or at least better for the people coming after us. So that's why I feel that these little, getting the policy, getting a structure, getting a process, and how things are done, and where the money's going and where it comes from, are all part of that structure for sort of securing, or at least building a foundation for the future. So that's my little 2 cents.
Yeah, and I wanted to chime in on that,
Can I just
Executive
make one
Bello.
comment about the regional aspect of it? Just that if you're going to look at it regionally, has there been any discussions or touch points with the Finger Lakes Regional Economic Development Council and get
Thank
them
you,
as a
Annette.
funding partner? I think
So we have
we're
the
talking about public policies. So.
Downtown Revitalization Committee. We've been in that discussion. You have been in the Art in the Loop discussions as well. So what we're trying to really do is to pool all of these organizations that already have arts on their, discussion, and pool us together, and then not double work the issues. So, for example, there is a wonderful study with Art in the Loop of the 4 cities. We've met with Buffalo as well, and I forgot to mention that we also met with Buffalo because they are further along than we are. So thank you, Annette. Yes, there are other community partners that we need to bring into the loop, but I'm going to make it clear that Executive Bello is waiting for the city to establish what that might look like. The county is going to take the direction of what we create. So we are, and again, Thomas and Sean have stated, we are in a perfect position to empower this plan the way that best serves the community. And also the county is really looking for an entire county. We even talked about NISTA funding and NEA funding and why they weren't being allocated. And we are absolutely in discussions with a 3-legged prong stool: advocacy, city and county funding. So thank you, Annette. And I'm sorry I jumped on that. I just wanted to give that there are other community partners that we want to bring in, but until we know, a quarter, how are we going to allocate this? And the fact is, the 34 plan has most of it in there. It's just a matter of compiling an art policy and how do we allocate these funds.
How would we feel about doing this on 2 tracks? Because this community-wide plan, I'm seeing that's going to take a while, but we want to get the 236,000 capital money out the door as soon as possible, and don't want to not be held up, but I just see that as being such a long process, that if we did the capital, the current 236 pot of money on a different track based on some of the requirements that are in the 2034 plan, based on some processes that the city already has in place for putting out RFPs and for public art, that we get that money moving while we're doing this plan, because I see this as taking kind of a long time if we wait for the larger master plan.
I think there was some discussion about this dissemination of funds, right, Blue? Or somebody was mentioning that in the smaller group, right?
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah. Sean and I had a good conversation with Wall Therapy, and then I've been chiming in, regarding like mechanisms for actually, spending and following some established processes to get current funding out to organizations, to artists in our community already doing that work, not necessarily reinventing all new systems. But I mean, do we need to keep talking about and decide upon this? Is sort of is it a yes or no question that we're looking to determine here? I'm not exactly sure. Are we looking to decide if yes, we're gonna allocate 100 of 236 for a consultant, or no? Are we trying to pull that question yes or no today?
I think we're trying to get to that point. This is really definitely some interesting points and suggestions here. So we could take some of the money that we have right now and move forward with a request for qualifications in a month, and start finding a consultant and start getting going on this plan. That again, the deluxe model of this includes both the public art master plan, where are we going to invest in public art, but also the larger ecosystem plan. We could do all that sort of in one long process, and that might take a year and a half, something like that, to have a final document and that sort of thing. So we can get started on that very soon if we want to, and use money from the current 236,000, or I hear a proposal out there to consider alternate funding for that. And, you know, one thing to keep in mind is we could pursue alternate funding, but the city's portion still comes from the 236, and it's only $40,000, something like that. So you still got $200,000 to get out into artists' hands soon, right? So that's one little sub scenario. The other is we don't touch the 236,000 at all, and somehow we try and find other money through the city to fund our portion, or in Bree's proposal, the 1/3 of it. I can't make any promises about that. I think that there's going to be some reluctance to move outside of that pot of money to find other money. I think it's more likely that we just use a smaller amount of the pot and pursue additional partners to help out. So just for the sake of round numbers, we use $36,000 for developing this plan, and then pursue another $70,000 to $100,000 through partners to fund the rest of it. And then this group has the remaining $200,000 to work with for this competitive grant program. So I think that's a viable option. The downside to this, the partners version, if you will, is that it could take a lot more time to get it started, because we have to make the case to the county, we have to make the case to Annette and her colleagues at the Community Foundation, or maybe there's other partners, and they may or may not be able to make a decision soon. They may or may not be able to come up with the money soon. So there is some risk that going the partner route would delay things. I'm not opposed to that. I just want to put that out there. Whereas if we did the city funding at all, we can move forward on it pretty quickly.
I just want to clarify too, really fast, sorry, that regardless of whether the plan happens or not, the team can be moving forward with the process for distributing the grant funds now.
Right.
So even if we were to say, yeah, we're going to do the plan, that doesn't hold up getting the funding out to artists right now. I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, the only question mark in that scenario is how much money can we get out there, but we can start with 100 and build from there.
I would rather move more slowly on the plan and make sure it's being done right, and that there are multiple stakeholders across the community, and move more quickly on distributing funds to artists. I think that getting money in the hands of artists is an urgent need. And while I recognize that this plan is very much needed in the long term, I think in terms of the next 6 to 12 months, nothing's going to break terribly if this plan isn't at 100% fruition in that time frame. as long as it's moving forward, I think that having that plan is good, versus there's definitely people in this community, there's businesses that are going to close, there are people who are going to have trouble paying their rent, they're going to have trouble buying food. Like, we need to get the money in the hands of artists now, and that's way more urgent than getting the plan done now. Getting the plan started now is fine, and then making sure that there's multiple stakeholders across the community is something that I really think that an effort that we should invest a lot of time and energy into.
Yes, I agree with that as well. I think that actually taking the $30,000 out of this plan and putting it into this, or taking the $30,000 out to start working on this plan, I think is a good thing on many levels. One, it shows our partners, our potential partners, that we've already got something there. And then we can build on that. It's a lot easier to go to somebody and ask for money when they see you've made some or you've got some already. So that, I think, is a really good idea. And I do think that this meeting only has maybe 15 more minutes. And I think we need to make some decisions like right now about if we decide on taking $30,000 out, and then how do we disseminate the $200,000 left, or $206,000 left, or whatever, and when, and the timeline, some general timeline for that. I think we need to make those decisions, I'm sorry to say, in the next 15 minutes, because I don't know when we're going to have a chance to make that decision again. And it's important that we get moving as soon as I think that one of the issues is that the new administration get in place. I do think that that's actually part of this, but they're going to be in place by January 1st. So we really have to have a plan to go.
Just a quick question here, maybe the summary. Are there not other sources from within the city to fund whether 36,000 or the full 100 for the consultant? It seems to me that's a key crux here, because there aren't a lot of other sources to fund the arts directly, artists and arts orgs.
Yeah, I mean, so typically we have a line in our budget for the city planning office for professional service agreements. It's a very small amount of money, but we use that for all kinds of plans that we try and work on. So there really isn't any money left in that. Beyond that, the city gets money from the federal government, and there's some strings attached to it. It comes from HUD, Housing and Urban Development. There's some strings attached to that sometimes it's worth it to use that money, sometimes it's not. So the best, honestly, to answer your question, Blue, the best option would be to see if the mayor wants to come up with some money. And I think that would be more of an advocacy question than necessarily coming from me. But honestly, if we put 36,000 towards this plan, that shows a good faith effort to the potential partners, and $200,000 between now and June 30th, and then another 236 next year. That's a decent amount of money to be working with. That pulling 36 out of it, I don't think is too big of a deal. But I don't think there's an easy answer to finding it somewhere else.
Yeah, and I'm going to piggyback. I really agree with Amanda that this plan does need to happen, but more critically important is literally getting artist funds to do work. I'm going to just pose it to the whole group. I say we vote on the $30,000 to be set aside. And that's only for this next 6 months anyway, because then our new year cycle starts on July 1st. So, and it also will move us along that when we meet with Mayor Evans towards the end of January, we will have this report for him, or this beginning process for him to review, and maybe then consider looking at other funds. So I want to spend our next 10 minutes in a voting mode if everyone's finished with the discussion.
Annette, I'm going to ask Annette a quick question while we have Annette on the phone. What commitment can we get from you right now from Community Foundation to say we're going to get some money. You're on the phone. We're talking about you. What do we need to do to get $50,000 from Community Foundation?
I can't make that commitment, you know that, but just being here and hearing the conversation, I can have that conversation with, Simeon and Jennifer and see, but I do think that if you're going to be developing a city master plan that the county is looking for to replicate, you're going to have to fund most of it. Let's be honest. Because it will serve as a model for so much more beyond that. But we can see what we can contribute.
Yeah, and I think it would be more than just the city. I think there would definitely need to be a focus on a city, but we need to think as a region or at a minimum think as a county collectively. And that would make the case to the county. And I would just offer a slight amendment to Annette's suggestion in that we set aside 36. So the nice round number left over is 200,000. And I think I can find a way to get an additional 4,000, and the city's contribution would be 40,000, and maybe that would be a little bit more appealing to our partners.
So just to be clear, when you're talking about a master plan, you are looking to create a regional master plan with other partners. Well, that's a whole different, that's what I mean. That's two different things. So
yeah, I think and maybe this ends up 2 contracts. I don't know, but we need a public art master plan for the city. And that's, again, where are we going to invest in public art? But we also need, as a region, an arts and cultural ecosystem plan. And again, hypothetically, we could do those together, but it's also possible to do them separately. And maybe have.
And I don't think we have to make that decision at this moment, actually.
No, it's just for sake of information to know that the public art plan, that's something that the city is going to have to take on. A regional master plan, that's something that definitely multiple stakeholders could be a part of and help and assist with funding.
So I guess my question, Annette, is why wouldn't the county be part of the city's master planning as well? Bello seemed very committed to that process.
If you were creating a city master plan, then you would have to take ownership of that. That's why I said, to clarify, if we're talking about a regional master plan, yes, there would be multiple stakeholders.
And also to, piggyback on that, the public art master plan would be specific to the city because it's the city's plan on how to invest in art with public funding. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we need to vote. Oh, okay. Well, all right. I'll just, so how many people are in favor of us taking the $36,000 and can I maybe just say putting it aside? So I have to kind of deal with what exactly is specific, but putting it aside, and who knows, maybe we'll find money and we can put it back. But the point is, I think we need that pot. I'm just talking personally. We need that pot of money to make money. It's like we gotta have a good faith that, okay, well, yes, here's some money that we're already starting with. We need this, 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 and this. And I think we can find it actually, and we may not. Don't quote me, but we may not even really need that 36,000. So but the point is, we need to vote that we can set that aside and use the $200,000 left for artists. So can we have a vote on that? All those in favor?
Is this for, I want to be really clear, we are setting it aside for planning in general or setting it aside specifically for a regional arts plan?
Yeah, I don't think we need to vote on that, but I don't think we really need to know that until we actually have more discussion with the city and with the county. I don't want us to kind of prematurely say we've got this idea of 2 plans without the input of the city's sort of vision and the county's vision in that discussion. So I think right now, I'm just saying we're putting aside that $36,000 for a plan. We don't know yet. We can decide on what that money will do at some point, and we can decide not to do that. But just for now, I think we need to decide that that's going to just be set aside until we decide what to do with it. And then the $200,000 can be disseminated to artists. So that's that's where I'm coming from. I don't know if I'm on the right track here. That's what I think we need to vote on right now.
I think that sounds right, Thomas.
I agree.
Does that make sense, Amanda?
That does.
Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate it.
Okay, so all those in favor of that combo that I just said?
I'm in favor.
Can I just see hands? Because
And just technicality, I don't think city staff would be voting on this.
they can't. Yeah, the city staff can't vote.
Yeah. So if you see our hands down, we're not. It's not because we're voting against.
Okay, so I think that
And
might be everybody actually.
Antonetta?
I think that's unanimous.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Antonetta and
Antonetta?
Yeah, I got Antonetta and
Okay.
Christina.
And
Okay,
we
thank
can
you,
also-
everybody. Yes. All right,
We
well,
should
those
also-
opposed, sorry. Those opposed, I'm gonna do the rules here. Those opposed, okay? Anybody abstaining? I think the whole city people are abstaining. All right, thank you. It's passed. All right.
I just want to make sure that we get our meeting notes out and a copy of this to those members that were not in attendance. So just sharing the information and the decision.
In our last 5 minutes, I guess, I know, Blue, we're probably not enough to just got time to discuss all this, but I know, Blue, you and Sean did talk about some ideas and probably in more depth than you might have time for, but I do like your idea that there is maybe a third party perhaps that helps to disseminate this. Since this group in a sense is not in a structure yet, I don't think, where we can be kind of disseminating that money with all that entails, the work that entails. So can you talk about that, Blue?
Yeah, just real briefly. I think that, over the years, what I've tried to remind and mention is that, there are great people and great organizations in this community that are doing well-regarded, some cases nationally regarded work, supporting artists. And also, I feel like in some cases the city has been put into the hot seat, making selections, commissioning artworks, sometimes, maybe, for example, using an artist's work without accrediting them. Some of these things have been happening where the city is maybe a little bit out of their role of expertise, but there are amazing experts in our community and organizations doing really great, in some cases, commissioning work directly exactly what we're talking about doing more of, and these funds are dedicated to. So along those lines, and with that in mind, Sean and I had a good conversation with Ian and Eric from Wall Therapy. I see them as a likely candidate for such an approach, where a good chunk of these funds, obviously to be determined, but a good chunk of these funds would go to Wall Therapy as the contractor to execute on, say, 10 murals. And they would submit a budget. They would work with this committee to make selections according to criteria that this committee deems critical. And Sean was very vocal that and very clear with this tentative conversation we had with Wall Therapy that, for example, those would be, artists living in this community and really focusing on artists of color, possibly only within the city. So anyway, point being that I wanted to put forth such an idea where the city is not administering every small grant for a mural, but yet a great organization that is well respected with a national reputation right on our doorstep could be doing that work with a little bit of guidance, a little bit of oversight, perhaps from the AC3 overall, and having a major impact in the community. And I will say that, it's pretty well known in the community that Wall Therapy has not been substantially funded over the years by the city of Rochester. So I just want to, kind of toss that out there as a very likely example of how the city could hire a contractor to execute on a whole bunch of smaller funds, getting those funds out to artists, increasing that vitality and activity that we're all so proud of.
And the other thing that I like about that is Wall Therapy is so well established, and they've demonstrated such a great ability to do so much with so little, and just a tremendous amount of fiscal responsibility and commitment to the community.
And their leader is a Black doctor. So we got that.
Well, I think we talked about this. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
I love that idea. We've done several contracts with Synthesis for the mural projects that we've
Yes.
done. So I think it's a great idea. I love Eric and Ian. I just have
And we talked about you a lot in our meeting because we figured you would understand and really appreciate
yeah,
it.
totally. I guess my only question, Christina, would be, this is separate from any of the like work we would do with them for education programs, correct? Like there wouldn't be any limits on. I don't know if Christina's still on the call.
Yeah, I think it would be a separate from that.
Okay.
But that's my sense. I mean, I'm not in the city,
Right.
but
Right, 'cause
yeah,
it's a
my
different
sense is,
area of
yes,
work.
I think those are two separate things.
Johanna, can you clarify though? I
Yeah,
think
so
the
let's-
locations would still have to be, the
Yeah,
mural, like, yeah, that's what I want to ask is the locations I think have to still be.
on public property. So here, let me suggest this, that city staff will need to come up with a sort of an outline of what the process needs to be for spending city money, because this is city money. We have some restrictions, and we do have processes that we have used before. So we can come up with sort of an outline of the basics that we need to adhere to. And then if we could get from you, and whether it's Blue or Sean, some of the, what you're talking about, what you would like to see happen with that 200,000, but we've got to do that within a city process. And the little bit of, some concern, and that's what I think Bree is addressing, is that if this is on city property, it's public art. If it's on a privately owned building, there could be a problem, because that's not, that may not be public art anymore. We may be improving private property, and you can't do that with city money. So we gotta figure out how we do this. Yeah, Blue?
Maybe an alternate approach, because Wall Therapy is the small entity in this conversation compared to the city, of course. Maybe what you could do is you could just spell out those most basic stipulations. Got to be on city property, or could be on private property if it's on, on a main thoroughfare and everyone
It's visible
driving
to the
by
public,
benefits
yeah.
from it. Like, for example, the recent amazing mural of John Lewis. What could
Yeah.
benefit our city more than that? But yet the city was not a supporter of that, was not financially funding that. And I see future murals like that as a huge miss if these funds are not funding, for example, the upcoming project that the same artist is doing of Malcolm X and the two local activists who, I'm sorry,
Constance Mitchell, and who was the other one? I forgot.
Reverend
Florence.
Oh, Florence, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So just
Florence.
for example, like it may
Ephraim
be
Gervais is his name.
may not be a city building, but there's undeniable that there's public benefit. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
you could
absolutely.
just
Yeah, yeah.
maybe you could spell out a couple key points, and
I
then
think we
Sean
can
and
do
I
that.
can meet with Wall Therapy and make sure that they could work within those. They're pretty flexible.
Also, I really would recommend that this committee come out with a statement. I also really like Wall Therapy. This is not disparaging to Wall Therapy at all, but there are going to be artists in the community that are still going to feel that all of a sudden this process directed funds to a specific agency again. I think you guys need to come up with a statement that the purpose of this was not to circumvent a future process, but to get funding out the door in the best way possible, in the quickest way possible with an established organization. But this is not how the funding will be perpetually distributed, because I think, not everyone, I mean, I don't know, I love Wall Therapy too, but not everyone is going to feel that way.
Well, and that's one of the things we did stipulate, is that it had to be a call. What they have to issue is a call, so that they are finding, if they're not, you don't select, you have to go and find other voices other people in other communities, you know, disabled communities. Anyway, you got to find other people.
They did a great job of doing that when they did that small fund distribution.
Yes, and so yeah.
So even that is something that they've demonstrated publicly that they can do
And the
already,
local-
which
the
is
local
different than
stipulation.
what the large
Yep.
mural projects are. But they've done that before too, and done it well.
Just to clarify though, Blue, no, I don't think anyone's disputing whether or not there's a public or a benefit at all or value at all to say that John Lewis mural as an example, but I do have to defer to our law department about whether or not we could actually use money to fund something that's not on city property. That's not a question or a value judgment on whether or not it's important to the community. It's whether or not we're actually allowed to. That's the question. And
we did say that we could even shift some of these funds in the future to, and that's a future year, I understand, but funds could be spent on temporal, non-physical arts.
Mhm. Yeah, that's not the issue, because you're right. I mean, you could even argue that maybe a mural isn't a permanent public art, but although they can be pretty permanent, but it's more that it's on private property. If it's painted on a privately owned building wall, that's the concern.
I guess what I mean is if we can shift the nature of temporary versus physical versus temporal, then certainly we could shift the definition of how public benefit is defined by being physically located on city property. It seems to me.
I don't know about that.
Well, maybe
The other thing is, if we eventually get other sources of money in our big pot to disperse, then that whole issue goes away. If this is not just city money, then you also have a lot more flexibility.
Here's a question. And moving forward, could we get a list of city-owned property, whether they be buildings or houses, whatever they may be, that this work can be put on? Is that possible?
we can do that.
Yeah,
And that's part of the public art master plan process too as well, but we can do some initial things. But
yeah, whether the buildings are vacant houses, whatever they may be, if it's a vacant lot and we can put a concrete wall in there on a city-owned property, whatever it may be, let's because we're hitting those targeted areas that may be blighted and may not have public art, so we may have to construct some walls. Can we get these vacant properties, houses, buildings owned by the city? Can we get a list of that so that way we can move forward with this?
Yeah, and I want to interject a concern I have, which is giving one art organization our entire pot, because I'm really looking at functional art. Covered bus stops are essential to Joseph Avenue and Clinton Avenue that are major throughways with no covered bus stops, light fixtures that are functional art, garbage cans that are functional art, and benches. So I want to just caution us that mural art is phenomenal, but I'm looking for functional art that it brings and instills pride in the neighborhoods I want to uplift. And the last thing is El Camino Trail, 2.5 miles of city property that ends at the zoo and Seneca Park, should be part of our visioning of connecting neighborhoods to each other in a way that creates health, vitality, and usefulness to the citizens of our city. So I just want to make sure functional art is included in that, because my people don't have a covered bus stop on Clinton Avenue, and that's not acceptable to me.
And that,
damn, get him, girl.
Yes. And that I want to 100% get behind you on that. And I only mention wall therapy because they are the low-hanging fruit in this conversation. They are the obvious first contractor that came to mind for Sean and I as the possible contractor. I believe this is a model for others as well, because they have the curatorial experience. They know how to run these calls. They're well respected. There are other contractors who can execute the projects that you're specifically talking about. I want to have a model like that working here so that city staff aren't getting caught in the position of selecting artists and artworks through a model that isn't embraced, or it just gets you out of the hot seat, Kevin, and other staff. Like, it's just not your expertise, but it is Wall Therapy's expertise, and other contractors who commission those other painted traffic boxes, et cetera, et cetera.
We are going to be involved in some fashion, Blue. No matter how this goes down, we're going to be involved.
My understanding of Synthesis role is that they're like a fiduciary, right? They're getting the funding. Then this committee, the city, and others are creating a process, drafting RFPs that are released, whether it's for an artistic bus stop, an artistic bench, a mural, whatever. So it's not just limited to one type of art. It's all the arts, but it's getting it out of City Hall or whatever. It's putting it in the hands of artists to direct that process. So I was just going to say, I just think the RFP process takes a while. So I would say a next step would be to kind of start thinking about what an RFP looks like and getting that drafted and making sure it meets the city's criteria and getting it out, because it sounds like the push for this group is to get money into artists' hands, and we have to do an RFP process for that. And so I would say like that would make the sense in my mind for the next step, just like quickly get something out there.
Yeah, and also I know we're well over time here, so I just want to kind of pull back from the weeds a little bit about what we do and talk about how we do it. We had this discussion with the budget office, and Christina, maybe you can chime in here. But there is definitely an openness among city staff that this initiative evolves to a point where we have an outside agency like Wall Therapy or ROCO or whoever administering the grants. But there definitely is some hesitancy to do that right away. And there's so much of our legs that need to get under us that hasn't happened yet for this process, that there's just some reluctance there. But in terms of the initial out of the gates approach to this, but I think we could work towards that. Whether it's some of it is carved out for Wall Therapy or an organization like that to administer a portion of, say, the 200,000. I don't know if we're just there yet. Christine, I don't know if you have anything to chime in about that in terms of budget office's concerns about that approach right away.
I would just say that I think everyone is just interested in this group getting its feet under them and starting the implementation process, and then using that to kind of pilot what you think it could be, couple that with some sort of planning effort, and then branch into what it will be in the long term, a year or so, or however long it is down the road. I don't think anyone is opposed to outside partners or supporters or other ways of implementing. I think it's just really trying to get it off the ground now while you have all this momentum around yourselves.
Christina, what do you, sorry, at the risk of putting you on the spot, but what do you think of the sort of hybrid approach of this committee has to develop a process of putting out a call and selecting and that sort of thing. And the city administers the grants for most of the 200, but there's a piece of it that we sort of pilot that, like, I don't know, I'll just throw out a number, 30,000 or whatever is for murals, and we pilot having Wall Therapy administer the let's say $30,000 in grants, and then the city somehow working with this team administers the remainder, and then we see how that goes, and we work towards getting some of that out of house, the administration part of it out of house. Is there an openness to that hybrid approach?
Yes, I would say so. I think there's just a lot of things you need to line up before that, like what Johanna was saying about just basic understanding of what's allowable with funding, like what Bree was saying, just making sure the community is very aware and we're being very transparent of this is what we're doing at this point in time because of these reasons. And then just the resources it would take to pull off a kind of a smaller grant, smaller application process, either that being through the city or through an outside organization. We just have to be realistic of what's able to be accomplished in the time period we want to accomplish it.
Well, I think we have to first know what the sort of boundaries or whatever the city, the city requires this. We're spending city or public money. So I think we got to go there first. And then from there, we can kind of figure out, okay, so this is wall therapy, you're getting this particular amount of money, we'll have to vote on that. And then this is the, it's within these parameters that you're able to use these funds. I mean, I think we're kind of talking about what happens after, but we actually don't know exactly what the legalities are with the city. So we're kind of talking before we kind of know actually all that information. So I think we have to know that information first. I'm sorry, go ahead, Maria.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Tom.
No,
So maybe Kevin or Heather can send out to all of you. We've got what's called an RFP policy.
Yeah.
And it's probably more than you ever want to read, but at least it'll give you an idea of what we do when we do any what we call professional services agreements, and that's basically what this would be. And there's even a sort of a template of what we put in our RFP. So, but when you look at it, keep in mind it's probably a little bit overdone for what we would need to do, but that's sort of the template and the process that we use. So then the other issue that has come up is this, whether is this private public property issue. And I'll do a little bit of, I'll think about that, but I guess I would caution that I have a strong concern that we cannot place public art on private property, even if it's visible to the public, because you're making an improvement to that private property owner's property, and that's a gift to them, an unconstitutional gift. So I got some concerns about that, but then I think what we had talked about is the way around. Let's get a good inventory of what city properties are available so that whole issue may be moved. We may have enough city locations that we can do mural art and you do it that way. So two things, we'll provide you with a copy of our RFP policy, so you know what we generally do when we look for consultants, and then we'll try to get this inventory of city properties. Does that address what you're talking about?
Any other legal restrictions too, Joanna? Oh, sorry, Sean.
No, I just have a quick question, because we were able, when I did the work for the city, when we were doing the focus investment strategies, we were able to actually put things on buildings that weren't owned by the city. And the city allowed that. And I don't know how that happened.
Nobody asked me. I
That's
don't
usually
know.
how I get shit done. But okay, that's how it happened.
Well,
was it city money or
Yeah.
was it federal or state money?
Oh, God, I got to
See,
remember.
that's the difference. You might
Okay,
have some
Okay.
different requirements. Yeah,
okay, thank you.
I don't know.
Joanna, if you could send us any of those legal parameters, that then we can, then we're sure we're not like chasing our tail around this, because if we continue this conversation with wall therapy and they start crafting, even just conceptually, of course, we want to make sure they literally are aware of all of the legal parameters that they need to work within, like all at once, so that they don't come back with something and then we have to say, oh, no, it's got to change this way, because there's not a whole lot of, it's kind of a public service that wall therapy would be taking on to take this on for us. It's not a watershed moment for them. They have their hands full with a lot of other things. So
Yeah, they probably
the way
don't
Sean and I
want to
talked with them, like, we want to be efficient with their time.
Okay.
Yeah, just to sort of temper expectations and be a little bit of a wet blanket. I mean, when you picture the great murals in our city, they're on old brick, former commercial and industrial buildings that are privately owned. In terms of the city's inventory, outside of like rec centers and libraries and city hall and the convention center, like the city doesn't own very many buildings in the city. Most of what the city owns are vacant lots. So just be aware that there's actually not much to work with on publicly mural side of things.
But that's why I was
Rec
asking.
centers.
Is that built that something can be put there where we have a structure and it's temporary, that can be in place, that can be there, and what are the insurances that happen there once we drop something in a vacant lot in a neighborhood where there wasn't art? That's our focus, where we're going for. Could that be done?
Yeah, that's an option too, to actually put a structure in place, I guess.
We
Yeah.
could also look at parks. There's parks all over the city. There's street malls, there's public owned land where we definitely could use public art, including murals. So I know the libraries, we work with rock paint in the libraries, and there's more requests from libraries than we possibly have the bandwidth for. So.
Okay. Well, I think we've got a few things to start moving on, both on our end and Lou and the co-chairs on your end in terms of actually drafting the process, because that needs to be in place before anything moves forward. I know everybody wants to get the money in the hands of artists as soon as possible, but we haven't really seen anything in terms of a draft process or anything like that. So there's still a lot of work to be done.
I know we're jumping into the weeds again. I got one quick question. And Joanna might know that. Does the city technically own school buildings? They do technically own school buildings, so that's another place where things.
Yeah, we own school buildings, but they're, we own the buildings. I don't.
It's like an exchange. I know there's one building that you just got 25 schools. I know you have to take that, and that's not even coming back on the grid as a school anymore. So it's like you technically own them, but it's kind of leased by the district kind of.
Well, yeah, and when they're in use for school purposes, educational purposes, we don't have control over them. So it's not, we couldn't give you permission to paint a mural on a school. I would say. Now the district could, although, you know what?
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, I think that's the answer.
Okay, thank you.
Super fast, just because when we did support the Constance Mitchell mural, or tried to, but we just needed the school district to write us a letter of consent that they first agreed, and then we could.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll circle back on the details of what we're going to do, but there's work to be done in the meantime, and stay tuned for scheduling a follow-up meeting. Any last thoughts? Thanks, everybody. Happy
Thank you.
holidays.
You have a good holiday, everyone.
Good holidays, everyone. Yeah,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.
All right. Bye.